I also want to personally thank all of you for coming. I wasn't sure that this was going to work given all the constraints, but I really enjoyed yesterday and I'm looking forward to this morning. And I want to thank the Institute for Nuclear and Particle Physics for their generous support of this event. All right, so is there anyone out there who I need to yell louder to bring them in here? I guess if they haven't figured it out by now, they will eventually. All right, well, I hope those of you who are returning to Athens got a chance to visit some of your old haunts yesterday evening after the dinner concluded. We're going to get started here with the scientific portion of this morning's session. On a personal note, I will say that the first search committee I ever served on was the search committee that hired Carl Bruni, and several members of that search committee are in this room. There we go, Steve Grimes, Joe Shields, David Ingram, Elena Opper, and myself were the search committee members, and we did an excellent job. And here is the person we hired who is going to deliver the next talk.
Thank you, Daniel, and thanks everybody for coming out to our celebration, especially those from out of town. You know, it's a big milestone for us, and I'm going to talk about, hope people aren't disappointed that there's not going to be too much science in this talk, but I'll try to weave some in there. I also want to relay just a little bit of information. The last couple days I've been very busy reviewing beam time request proposals for the high-intensity gamma ray source facility at the Triangle University's nuclear laboratory, which is a Duke, UNC Chapel Hill, North Carolina State collaboration. And the tunnel director, Robert Janssens, and the tunnel management would like to pass along their congratulations to the Edwards Accelerator Laboratory. That's all of you for 50 years. I need to be. Okay. On the straight and narrow. And so I'm going to say a few words about the last 50 plus years. And as I maybe alluded to last night, I've actually known about the lab for longer than I've been here. And this gives me a chance to drop a few names from the more distant past that might resonate with some of the more senior people. Fred Bateman I actually met in the early 1990s when I was just getting started as a graduate student. Was at an APS meeting. We had both done measurements of neutron interactions on silicon 28, and I saw his talk and I introduced myself to him and talked about nuclear physics stuff. So that's my first introduction to the lab here. Jim Gilmette was a postdoc for Duke when I was a postdoc at UNC Chapel Hill. So we overlapped in that way. And Jim did his PhD with Steve Grimes here at Ohio University. Ron Padroni was a Duke PhD who did a postdoc here and then went back to North Carolina, where he's now faculty at North Carolina A&T. And Tom Massey I met several times at conferences. I remember one at Notre Dame. It's one of these kind of forgettable, like white paper or something or other meetings. But I did meet Tom and learned about the lab there. So I don't want to dwell too much on my next slide. It's not a real happy one, but when I was thinking about my time and experiences here, it is an important memory for me. And so basically, I showed up here for work in 2001, and on the Tuesday of my second week on the job, 9/11 happened, and I still remember coming into the lab and bumping into Dan Carmen, who was a faculty member at the time, very concerned, look on his face, and he said, "Carl, you've got to come see this, and there's a television in the control room of the accelerator lab, mostly just to entertain the night shift, but it was tuned to the news station, and there was only one tower had been hit at that time, and that's where we watched it. This is a picture from just a few years ago when Roxanne and I visited the memorial. Working with the students is one of the highlights and also a way to work in some of the science. And there's all kinds of students, masters, undergraduate, my PhD students, other PhD students in the lab. Can't mention every name. One really excellent example is, and one of my favorite is Chris Dodson, an undergraduate student I worked with about 12 years ago. He was actually an engineering bachelor's student, but he was just outstanding with AutoCAD and designing equipment. And this is just a picture of one of the widgets that he designed, and then this was actually built by a commercial vacuum company, but it's a target chamber for nuclear physics experiments, and there's lots of interesting guts inside of here. And he went on to work for SpaceX after getting his degree for several years. Then he did a PhD in aerospace at UCLA, and he now is the director of propulsion for Relativity Space, which is a startup company for doing cheap satellite launches. And this is a growing industry, and I think he's positioned great for it. He also grew up in Albany, Ohio, which is just down the road, which is also, I think, a nice part of the story. So unfortunately, I can't name too many names here, but I am going to go through my students who completed their PhDs and just say a couple things about what we did and really what they did. My first student was Callan Matai, who did measurements at Edwards and also at Triumph, which is Canada's National Laboratory for Nuclear and Particle Physics. And we studied the fusion of alpha particles with carbon-12, which is very important for trying to understand actually the origin of oxygen in the universe. The fusion produces oxygen. We believe this happens in red giant stars, which is a phase of evolution that most stars will pass through. And if the stars are sufficiently massive, they will explode as a supernova and disperse the carbon throughout the universe and provide seed material for later generations of stars and perhaps our own solar system and even the planet Earth. And I've had several students explore different aspects of this nuclear reaction, so you will see it more than once. Catalin is now a staff member at EAL and INPP, which is a international laboratory for nuclear physics in Romania, where his home country is. Remy Attacola is here, and we worked together on an experiment at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the Hollyfield Radioactive Ion Beam Facility, measurements with the radioactive nucleus fluorine-18, which is important in nova explosions and understanding the elements, especially radioactive elements that might be made in a nova outburst. And Remy may say some more about our work together. Dan Sayer followed in 2011. He measured some different aspects of the carbon-12 alpha-gamma O16 reaction here at the Edwards Accelerator Lab, in fact, using that piece of equipment that Chris Dodson had made, which I showed previously. Deleu Divarotni performed measurements on the very heavy isotope of oxygen, oxygen-24. Its normal stable oxygen is isotope 16, 17, 18, so this is far off of stability, and this was done at the National Superconducting Cyclotron Lab in Michigan, California. And basically I've been measuring the cross-section for removing neutrons, you learn about the structure of this nucleus and how those neutrons are arranged into orbitals. Shamim Ahmed performed measurements in the Accelerator Laboratory here of what I call alpha transfer reactions. And so this is taking an alpha particle out of another nucleus and transferring them onto carbon. This also tells you information about that carbon-12 alpha fusion reaction. The next student, and I had 3 in one summer, which was kind of hectic, was Cody Parker, who is also here somewhere. And she completed her PhD in 2016 on the tritium D gamma reaction. This is a rare branch of the fusion reaction, the tritium D fusion reaction. But it's very interesting. It can tell you about how many fusions are taking place and is used as a diagnostic for fusion. And she may say more about that, or not. Another student from that busy summer was Sushil Desai, and this is a picture of him working on the swinger, and that's a little bit of a funky picture, so here's a more formal one on his PhD defense date. And he studied the transport of neutrons in iron. So it wasn't exactly a cross-section measurement, but it was measuring what happens when you let neutrons loose in the middle of an iron sphere and let them bounce around and eventually come out. Geary, this is graduation day. I would say staging underneath the convo relatively early in the morning. Reckham is ever jovial, and his thesis was measuring this carbon alpha fusion reaction at Triumph. So that's, again, the national laboratory in Canada. And my last student to complete their PhD was last year, Panero, who measured helium-3, helium-4 elastic scattering at Triumph. And I have 4 students in the pipeline now, and I can't talk about everybody, but this gives you some feeling for the research that I've done here. Probably about 2/3 of the experiments have been done locally. Better stay on target. And most of them have been nuclear astrophysics in some form or another. I have one applied nuclear physics. That is the measurements by Sushil Desai of neutrons in iron, although I would say that there's lots of overlap between the astrophysics, nuclear structure, and applications, and sometimes there's more than one thing they're good for. Now, there's more than just students. The technical staff is essential and also has been a pleasure to work with. I especially want to call out Don Carter, Devin Jacobs, and John O'Donnell. Let's not do that. And recently we've hired Greg LeBlanc as well, who's not pictured here, but within the last year, as Devin Jacobs has retired, John O'Donnell has unfortunately passed away as well too. But these people have had a tremendous amount to do with the success of the lab, and I think that should be obvious also from Don's talk yesterday. A great example of the functioning of the technical staff was the Pelletron upgrade, and I don't want to dwell on this because Don talked about it already, but you can see actually some of the bits that were involved here, like the terminal potential stabilizer. This is the palette of pulleys and pulley motors before they were installed, and then the lower right shows the finished product, the Pelletron chains installed in the vertical column of the machine, and you can see the tight space here to fit 3 chains in there was really quite an engineering feat. And the success of this was due to the technical staff and also our machine shop, NEC people. And one thing that's remarkable about this is that we knew this was coming. So David Ingram had led the proposal that led to the funding for this, which was $321,000 from the NSF, and you place the order, and then it takes probably over a year for them to make the parts. And so we knew this was coming. We told all the graduate students, the accelerator is going to get a heart transplant, and you better take as much data as you can now, because we don't know how the surgery is going to go. And it's literally, tearing out the guts and putting it back together. And so all the students took tons of data. We told our prime outside users the same thing. They came and took data. And then it was like, in just a blink, it was over and working again. And then we're like, we can't take any more data. We're kind of busy analyzing. And it was just amazing how smoothly this changeover went. And again, that's really people behind that. I also want to acknowledge the research faculty. Tom Massey, who's been here since 1989, so much longer than myself, and Alexander Voinov, who joined us soon after I did. And they are full-time researchers supported by federal research grants that really provide the continuity and expertise on a day-to-day basis in the lab. I'm going to change gears a little bit here. Many of you know that I have an interest in reptiles and amphibians, and they even managed to intersect with the Accelerator Lab. This is top pictures of snapping turtle on South Green Drive next to Clippinger. The bottom picture was taken by Sam Panero. It was actually Reckham Geary's graduation day, front door to the Accelerator Lab. And if you look closely at the picture here, you'll see that there's actually two frogs in that picture. And so they're following in the footsteps of Ed Sadowski and making out at the Accelerator Lab. What else can you say? So sometimes hobbies and work intersect. I don't know what to say. There's other aspects of the laboratory which I greatly enjoy. Reaching outside of the Accelerator Lab to the rest of the department, university, and the general public. This shows one example, a Boy Scout tour fortuitously scheduled for February and not March of 2020. And so we could do things like this and not worry about social distancing and things like this. This is a group of Boy Scouts, which, by the way, is not limited to boys anymore. And we were playing with the Geiger counter here, and Steve Grimes mentioned that a banana will nudge the needle on a Geiger counter. The right lantern mantle will peg the meter on the Geiger counter, which is much more dramatic. Of course, it's on the lowest scale. It's really not a lot of radiation. And the scouts really enjoyed this, and this young gentleman is testing his phone just to see if it would show any radiation, which it doesn't. So I'm working towards my conclusion here, and some other people talked about this yesterday, but I think I want to weigh in on it too. How does a lab manage to stick around for 50 years? And I think the sort of human factors may be the most important part. And, and number one, day to day, you have to have students and technical staff and faculty to get things done. And I've talked about that already, but the bigger picture also matters a great deal, and I'd like to remind people of that and acknowledge the contributions. Certainly the machine shop. The accelerator was made by a high voltage engineering company, and it effectively went out of business for high voltage accelerators 30 plus years ago. And so if something breaks, you probably aren't going to just go buy a replacement part, but you're going to have to make a new one, visit eBay or something like that. And in addition, making new equipment is critical with the machine shop. I would also like to thank just the Department of Physics as a whole for supporting the lab in many ways, including faculty positions. And so 50 years is much longer than the working lifetime of a faculty member, so you have to regenerate the faculty with new hires, and that takes support, which is not always so easy to get. And I'd also like to thank the chairs, and it was great seeing Lewis Wright yesterday, who hired me, who was followed by Joe Shields, and David Ingram, I assume, is here somewhere as well. Yes. And so thanks to the chairs, but also the rest of the university, the College of Arts and Sciences, vice presidents, and on up to the state of Ohio. Federal funding is also critical. At the moment, we in low energy nuclear physics are bringing in a little over $1 million a year, which pays a lot of graduate student stipends and many other things. And that's critical. And also, the scientific interest and support from the field is critical. And if people weren't interested in what we were doing, this wouldn't happen. So I thank all of these, and you could, if you cross any one of those off the list, I think the whole thing kind of crumbles. I would also add that we're fortunate that we've got a great accelerator and a very good building with infrastructure. It was mentioned that there is a twin machine in Athens, Greece, and we've been much more productive than they have over 50 years. And you ask yourself why, and I think a big reason is we have these 2 target rooms, 4-foot thick shielding walls, chemistry lab, great ion sources, pulse beam, and we've modernized over 50 years and invested in improvements. And if you compare the 2 labs, they're really not comparable. And I think even though we have the same orange tank, everything else is different. And we're in a much better place because of that. And some of this is just the wisdom of people like Roger Finley and Ray Lane, who made good choices. And also, we weren't being too cheap, I think, back in the 1960s when we designed the building. And this is my last slide. What do I think about the future? Well, it's hard to predict, but I think it looks pretty good. So when I joined the lab 20 years ago, it was kind of a low point, actually, for low energy nuclear physics. A number of labs had closed. There weren't a lot of faculty positions to apply for. There were these other shiny high energy facilities like Jefferson Lab and RIC that was getting lots of attention. And at the same time, I kind of knew that there was good physics to do, so I wasn't worried about that part of it. But you did kind of wonder, but things have gotten steadily better over the past 20 years. Currently we have more funding in the lab than at any other time since I've been here. And I think that sustaining that is very likely. And you ask yourself, well, why? And so there's connections to astrophysics are key. And in some sense, the golden age of astrophysics with gravitational wave astronomy and space telescopes, gamma ray astronomy, radio astronomy, neutrino astronomy, all of these things coming together. The fact that there is this facility for rare isotope beams, which is nearly complete, as a new national laboratory at MSU, has really focused a lot of energy and people on low energy nuclear physics. And also the applications of nuclear physics are getting, I think, much more organized for deciding what's important, what's going to be funded, and so there's growth in that area as well. And we have right now a whole bunch of pending proposals for applications, and I was talking to Zach the other day, and it's like, well, we better hope we don't get too many of these funded, because I don't know how we'll ever get all the work done. But that would be a good problem to have, and we would actually have resources to hire people to get the work done, and we would do it. And so we have all kinds of great opportunities right now, and I think it's a very good place to be. So I'm going to conclude with that. Thanks for your attention this morning.
Yes, Steve.
Yes, so the remark by Steve Grimes was that regarding the laboratory in Athens, Greece, one of their senior faculty actually a few years ago applied for one of our open faculty positions, and so he had visited the lab here a couple times and was clearly liked what he saw. So Remy, come on up, and I hope everything is in good order for you there.
Thank you. Hello. Okay. My name is Adirami Adekola. I did my PhD completed in 2009. It's been 13 years, and I'm glad that I can be back to Ohio. So when I was contacted by the committee to come around and give a talk, I wasn't sure of what to say. But then I gave a second thought, and I came up with this title. So some of the things that I will be talking about today is more of a personal experience. And so I give it the title, My Journey Through PhD Program and Beyond, celebrating the 58th anniversary of Edwards Accelerator Lab. I currently work with Miriam Technologies. Miriam Technology is into nuclear instrumentation, but I work specifically with Canberra. Canberra is a kind of a subsidiary of Miriam Technologies. The title, my company don't really care about what title you have, okay? It's all about what you can do, and then for the employee, it's all about what you can get in terms of your pay. But currently I'm a scientist. I'm a research scientist by title, but I do more than being a research scientist. In this talk, let's see. Okay, I will read a few remarks about my experience at Ohio University, and then I will give you some snapshots of some of the things I did for my PhD, my postdoc, and then I will spend a little bit of my time to show you what I'm doing currently, and then I will conclude. My journey into PhD program at Ohio University started on the day the admission committee decided to offer me admission. Apparently, I only submitted one application that academic year, so I didn't give it any second thought than to accept the offer. For all members of the admission committee for 2003-2004 academic year, thank you for believing in me. I appreciate that. I also can see that some of my professors who taught me are here today. I can see Charlotte Esther, I see Daniel Phillips. Even though your style of teaching is different, you all meant well, and I'm really glad that I can be one of your students. Thank you. Student-professor relationship. I call him Prof, my PhD student, and I don't think I ever call him by his name. But for the purpose of this presentation, I will. After passing my qualifying exams, I was sure that I would do research in nuclear physics. But at the time, I wasn't sure whether I would do it in experimental or theoretical. My plan was to try both with special studies. However, my first try was with Carl. And I think I like his style, so I was stuck with him. In my opinion, I don't think there is any student who wanted to start PhD research that doesn't have some fears and concerns. At least I did. How difficult? How long? Am I making the right choice? Are there the right equipment for me to be able to complete my research? Is the funding renewable till I complete my research? And so on. So many of these my concerns, Carl was able to alleviate during my professor-student relationship with him. He recommended few books, but there is one on which we meet every week for me to share what was read and for me to have opportunity to ask him questions, which I utilized to better understand what I was getting into. So this weekly meeting not only helped me in understanding the major concept needed to provide the fundamental knowledge, it also promotes some levels of assurance for success and good professor-student relationship. One of the things that I appreciate about him is that he was never tired of my questions. And there wasn't one time during my stay on this campus that he was mad at me or something. I find him to be very calm, genuine in his dealing with his students. Thank you, Carl, for all that you taught me. Nuclear launch. Nuclear launch is another one of my remarkable experiences here at Edwards Lab. For those in the audience that doesn't know what nuclear launch is, this is a weekly nuclear seminar open to all students that are interested to do research in nuclear physics. The paper for discussion is selected by the faculty, is assigned to graduate students, and at times to a postdoc, to read and prep to present a digested version of the paper for discussion. Yes, some of the technical details may be missing in the paper. It may as well be above the knowledge base of the graduate students. But the discussion mostly between the professors helped. So more importantly, it is an avenue to learn the current trends and a good training platform for graduate students to develop the know-how of giving technical presentation. I will encourage grad students to use this opportunity to brush up their presentation skill. Even if you are not selected for the nuclear launch seminar, gladly volunteer to do so. Edwards Accelerator Lab. The NIMBIN analog acquisition system was first introduced to me at Edwards Lab. As you are aware, Canberra manufactures wide varieties of germanium detectors, my current employer. I am an expert in using NIMBIN as a diagnostic tool for troubleshooting the characteristic noise behavior of these devices. Germanium detector was first introduced to me at Edwards Lab. In fact, the very first detector that I filled with liquid nitrogen, I didn't know at the time that the door to be full, you have to continue the filling until you can physically see the LN2 coming out of the exhaust. I nearly caused some damage to that detector. But now, the guy that almost caused a damage to such an expensive detector eventually became an expert in germanium detectors in terms of the operation and the design. Thirdly, my first nuclear beam measurement was conducted at Edwards. I went through all the required training to become a certified operator to the accelerator. And I was able to utilize that program to be involved in as many of the experiments as possible. Okay. Workshops. One of the things that I appreciate about Bruni is his unrelenting support for his graduate students to attend workshops, schools, and conferences. I attended several summer schools on physics, of radioactive ion beam, special school on methods of direct nuclear reactions, symposium on workshops on nuclear physics and applications in astrophysics. I utilized the support to attend as many of these meetings as is available to me without any objection. I would strongly recommend that all grad students do the same. Maximize that opportunity because that is the only time you have now to enrich your knowledge and to know what is going on elsewhere outside your comfort zone. You will get to meet new people. Most importantly, have knowledge of ongoing research experiments from different nuclear facilities and how yours fits into theirs to produce the overall bigger picture of what you are doing. Collaboration with the outside group. Because of the long-standing collaboration of my supervisors at that time, combined with our knowledge about Olefeed radioactive ion beam facilities at Oak Ridge, invitation of participation in experiments to be performed and conducted at this facility is always extended to us on a regular basis. Even when Bruni is not able to go, he always provides all the needed support for me to participate. There are lots of peer-reviewed publications in my portfolio that came as a result of my involvement in many of these experiments during my grad school here at Ohio University. So these experiments actually open up opportunity for my second postdoc, which I will show you in a minute. I will say a little bit remarks about my PhD research. My PhD research is mostly on fluorinating-Dehn reaction. I won't spend a lot of time because I know I'm already out of time. It's a proton transfer reaction. And we performed the measurement at radioactive ion beam facility in Oak Ridge. One of the interesting things about this reaction is that it has a direct astrophysical relevance to novae. And it also attracted a lot of collaboration from several institutions because of the relevance to the astrophysics area. So the approach represents the very first successful spectroscopy application to the Dehn reaction to a radioactive. In fact, yesterday I was talking with him, Carl, and we realized that this reaction, there have not been any other experiment performed that is as successful as this very particular fluorinating-Dehn reaction. And it became the template for subsequent Dehn reaction to radioactive beam. The idea is that it is an inverse kinematics where the populated level in neon-19 will decay within a very narrow window into oxygen 15 and alpha. And these charged particles are detected by EDE telescope, silicon detectors. It involves a lot of cleaning up, polishing. Eventually, we were able to, I won't have a lot of time to spend into, but if you're really interested to see more of what we did, I can direct you to some of our publications on that reaction. When I left Ohio, I moved to UNC Chapel Hill for my first bookstore. I was only there for 1.5 years. And as expected of a postdoc position, you have to quickly learn what to do. I was hired by UNC Chapel Hill, but I was stationed at Tornell, the Triangle University Nuclear Lab inside the Duke. My assignment was to make use of NRF, the nuclear resonance fluorescence, to probe into knowing the low-lying electric and magnetic dipole excitation below neutron separation energies, E1, E2, M1, excitation in some actinides. One of the things about NRF is that it's an effective spectroscopy method to investigate collective M1 and E1. Keep in mind that you are looking for the level structure of this actinide below neutron separation energy, because above that is a very big, giant distribution. And the idea is that because of the fact that there is a lot of theoretical calculations out there with no experimental result to support it, that's one of the reasons why this project was actually supported. And the main objective is to come up with some data needed to develop the non-destructive inspection of cargo at the port, where you have some gamma ray, you bombard it to some cargo, and then you look at the gamma ray that comes out of the cargo to give you any signature if there is any radioactive stuff that is within that cargo. The X facility at Panero produced monoenergetic and 100% linear polarized gamma beam suitable for this investigation. So there are a few photons. So NRF is also the same as photon scattering, where you inject gamma ray, you use that gamma ray to excite the nucleus, and then the gamma ray that comes out of it tells you what level that it came from. So one of the reactions that I particularly did when I was in UNC using the Tornet facility is the photoscattering reaction on thorium-232 nucleus. And I was able to identify some low-lying E1 and M1 states in thorium-232. In fact, I still talked to my supervisor a few weeks ago where he was telling me that this work is one of the successful photon scattering in the history of X facility. The other experiment that I was involved with is the gamma-gamma prime on uranium-238 and 235. So more is in those publications if you're really interested. I was only able to stay at UNC for 1.5 years when I saw another postdoc opportunity with Rutgers University. I was hired to do some research looking for, trying to validate an alternative to neutron capture on some exotic nuclei. Hired by Rutgers, but I stationed at Oak Ridge National Lab. And being at Oak Ridge National Lab, I was able to participate in many radioactive measurements conducted using the facility over there as well. As we all know, astrophysics, in some of the majority of the nuclei that is produced in stars employ the use of our process. And half of those, heavier than ion, are produced by the process of rapid neutron capture. But it is well known that the rate of neutron capture, that is their cross-section, is completely not known. And it's essentially very difficult to perform in the lab because of the short half-life of this exotic nuclei. Hence, we need some forms of indirect approach. And one of the reasons why I eventually joined this group was to look into how can we validate the deep peak gamma as a surrogate for neutron capture. Deep peak gamma is one of the potential alternatives for neutron capture reaction for this exotic nuclei. There are a few measurements that we did. We did molybdenum 95 N gamma using the LANS facility at Los Alamos. We also did deep peak gamma using silicon telescope array for reactions at for that at A&M, Texas. One of the papers that came up from that is also on this slide. So I want to quickly spend a little bit of my time on a few things that I'm currently doing. Keep in mind that a few things that I will say on this slide doesn't really represent everything that I do with mirroring technologies. And it may be also difficult for me to say a lot of few of the things that we are doing, but I will try my best to say as much as I can within the limited amount of my time I got. The very first thing, 10 years ago, I was employed by Canberra as a research scientist. I was initially with the physics department of the company, but because of I was able to quickly identify areas where I can showcase myself in the company. So I saw that Canberra is into nuclear instrumentation, but they make a lot of detectors. There's a wide variety of detectors that Canberra make, mostly germanium detectors. We have quartz detector, we have Beji, we have fuel detectors, and so on and so forth. So one of the projects, which I was a lead physicist on that project, which actually advertised my capability of what I can do, is called SAGE well detector. It's a small anode germanium well detector, but in this case, the detector sensitivity, which in terms of efficiency and energy resolution, is so superior compared to all the detectors combined that Canberra has ever made. And it's because this detector was specially designed using combination of finite element analysis combined with Monte Carlo simulations, which I did. Finite element analysis is more of solving Poisson equation anyways. But you have to ensure that you apply the necessary boundary conditions. I still remember the mathematical methods taught by me by Daniel Phillips. So some of those studies are very, very, very relevant in you knowing what you're doing as a physicist. So this detector is available in 5 different detector sizes and also in 2 different sample sizes. So for any application that has to do with looking for low activity, you have laboratory sample, and you want to know what is the content, what is the radioactive content of that material, this detector is very suitable for it. Maybe low activity sample, you may not have a lot of samples. Once you have as tiny or whatever size you have, this detector has sensitivity low enough for you, high enough to be able to help you see what you're looking for. And because of the specialty of what this detector can do, there are a lot of publications that I was also involved. Because one thing I do like about myself is being able to put together something in your head and also publish it so that it can be out there for people to understand what you are doing. Okay. One of the things that I was also involved, because of my proficiency in the use of finite element analysis and the use of Monte Carlo simulations, it opened up some ways by which you can optimize the performance of detectors. Keep in mind, Canberra is into detectors. They want to kind of sell many of these detectors as possible. They also want to use that. They want to see how they can improve on the performance of their detector to compete very well with their competitors. So one of the things that came up is to come up with a way to understand pulse shape, position-dependent pulse shape distribution within the germanium detector, which is very possible to do. By my proficiency in finite element analysis, I was able to start playing around without anybody telling me what to do that. I just came up with that idea, trying to generate what the pulse looks like at a very particular position within the bulk volume of the germanium detector, and then see how that changed from one position to another position. This actually attracted my supervisor to kind of see how we can move that to another level that eventually lead us into having a collaboration with a nuclear physics group at Livermore. The idea is that we can use the pulse shape, the pulses, that because when you have a gamma interaction, it generates a lot of charge carriers. The electron moves to one contact, the holes that was created from that interaction move to the other contact. So you can use that to generate what the pulse looks like. And depending on the position of the interaction, we determine how the shape of that pulse will look like. So one of the things where this is very relevant is you can use that to understand the defects, because when you grow the crystal, there could be some defect that comes from the lattice structure during that process. Or when you introduce the doping, there could be some defect that is created in the course of that process. So, but the position-dependent pulse shape characteristic response of the detector will tell you how you can understand what the defect is doing in terms of the operation of this detector. It can also help you to eliminate the unwanted events. Thereby, you can use that to enhance the signal-to-noise ratio within the bulk volume of your detector. I won't say much more than that, but there are a few publications that we already put together on that very particular collaboration work. One of the things that came up from my proficiency with finite element analysis is I was able to combine the operation of wide varieties of the detectors in Canberra with experience of two of my senior colleagues. These are people that have been in the company 40, 45 years, so they are old. So I was able to use so they saw it as a leverage by which so we came up with another kind of detector, which is completely not in the portfolio of Canberra. We call it centroid contact radiation detector system. This is a detector where the contact for the collection of the charge carriers is at the center of the bulk volume of the detector. You can use that to maximize, you can use that to determine, so using that doesn't limit how big, because one of the things that you need to keep in mind is that depending on the size of the detector and where your contacts are, will determine the strength of your electric field within the bulk volume of the detector. But by coming with this idea of having the contact to be, the collecting contact to be at the center of your volume detector, it allows you to, it gives you some leverage of being able to optimize the electric field distribution within the bulk volume of the detector such that you don't have any limitation to the size, okay? And the size of the contact, keep in mind, is also determining the capacitance of your detector, which invariably determine the energy resolution of your detector. So if the size of the contact, we can design it such a way that it's very small, that will eventually translate into making the detector to have a good energy resolution. Good energy resolution, bigger size volume efficiency, which is completely different geometry size, the different geometry of the detector that Canberra ever made. So this eventually led the company to push for a patent, which is up there. So invariably, we are in the process of developing some prototypes out of this new invention that we've been able to put together. My last, not really my last slide, but I'm getting to the conclusion now. In the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working on something we call ages. Don't bother about where that name comes from. It's just a name given to this device by the product manager, okay? It has nothing to do with what this unit is all about. So ages is a portable high-purity spectrometer. It's the newest transportable battery-powered Imerion portfolio. And it's one of the best portable germanium detector device that is out there at the moment. It's thermocycle-free cryostat, which means that if your detector suddenly starts to warm up, you don't need to wait for the detector to fully warmed up because of the hysteresis kind of behavior of the germanium detector. You don't need to wait till you start to pull it back down. It has laboratory-grade energy resolution. It has attracted interest from various nuclear applications. This has been, because I'm a lead physicist on this product. There are many complexity in the design of this product that require a kind of a close attention of somebody who knows what it's doing in terms of what the detector is doing within the unit. I'm the one that put together the work instructions that all the assemblers and the test guys are using to produce this product. Because there is nobody that knows more than what this unit is all about, I've been asked to act as production manager, not product manager, production manager for this unit. As you can see in the slide, it's a multi-use device. It can be used in the lab. As you can see, that is the device inside the shield. It can be used, you can put it on the cart and do some radioactive survey. As you can see, you can carry it and move around, look for some hidden radioactive contamination somewhere. The other thing that I want to mention is that I also provide sustaining physics and engineering work on every standard germanium detector production in Canberra. And I also give training to all newly hired field service engineer and all the test guys in my department, and so on and so forth. The other things that I need to mention is that even though I still love to be in academic eventually, because maybe I will migrate into teaching eventually, so I try to keep in touch with my teaching ability as well. I'm an adjunct physics faculty with the CCSU. That is Central Connecticut State University. In fact, one of the things that I'm working with the head department now, because they have a small Van der Graaf accelerator also in the department. So I'm trying to see whether we can resuscitate that facility, which eventually maybe I might talk to Carl on how, because it's been a while, it's been 13 years. So, so if we need the support of the experience of some of the people here in this department, I might want to tap into that to see whether that is feasible. In my conclusion, as we celebrate the 58th year operation of this lab, I would like to use my conclusion to express my gratitude and thanks first to Carl Bruni, and then to all the professors in the department, and to the entire staff of the department for all your efforts in creating the environment and research facility well suitable for promoting science and technology. I look forward to another productive 50 years ahead. Congratulations and happy celebration.
Thank you very much, Remy. So I think we're going to have a switch of computer now. So Cody, if you want to come up, I will gently detach Carl's computer. And for those of you who are wanting coffee, etc., I believe more coffee will be delivered shortly. Carl, is this your power cord? Okay, I'll get that
Oh,
after.
I'm standing on it, I'm sorry.
All right, so the next speaker is Cody Parker, who is another Ohio University alum, and Cody is now a postdoc, right, at Texas A&M University, and she is going to tell us about, is this like a Parker's journey, there and back again?
It kind of is.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for still joining here on Saturday morning. So basically, I'm going to be talking about my time here at Ohio University, but then I've actually had the great opportunity to come back and be a visiting scientist over the last few years. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I am originally from about 30 miles outside of Pittsburgh, kind of like small town Western PA type thing. I went to the Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which is again another small college town in Western PA. And maybe there's about 5 physics students per class here. And so we had very limited research opportunities there. Originally, I was actually going to be like a high school physics teacher, and then I realized I didn't really like large classrooms of students. So, okay, what am I going to do? And one of the professors there encouraged me to look into a research experience for undergraduates program. And so I applied to a few different ones, and I was selected to go to the University of Notre Dame, and I was placed in their nuclear science lab there. I was technically in Michael Wiescher's group, however, I think he was in Germany like the whole summer. And so I was basically assigned to Ed Steck, I'm sure some of you in the room know him, and some of his senior graduate students. And basically from day one, I was treated like I was just, one of the people in the lab. I was, crawling around on the floor, pulling cables. At one point, we actually had to go inside the accelerator tank and work on stuff, and it was pretty much the greatest thing I ever did. And so I decided that, I had to go to grad school for nuclear physics, but where am I going to go? And so I basically did a Google search for universities with accelerator labs. I had never heard of the Big Orange Tank or anything at Ohio University. The only mention of Ohio that I knew that existed was one of my friends came here for a music performance degree. So it was a new thing. I had no idea this existed. And so I came and did, the nice little lab tour and the visit and everything. And one of the main takeaways I have from that is just a few grad students. We just kind of went upstairs in Clippinger to room 338, and someone basically said, "Who wants to take a prospective student to lunch?" And a few people volunteered, and we actually just went uptown and got some sandwiches, and we sat on the statue and ate lunch. And that has always stuck with me, and actually every time I visit, I always have to eat on the statue. And basically met, some of the different faculty and everything. And actually, my lab tour was done by Carl. And so I was accepted to some other places, waitlisted here and there. And basically, I decided, okay, I'm going to go to Ohio, and I'm going to work for Carl. Now, Carl didn't know that at the time, because obviously, you just come in as a grad student, and eventually you have to get through your courses and do everything. And it worked out. I worked for Carl. I worked with him for both my master's and my PhD. And so actually, I'll have a little bit more on what I did at the lab. And then after that, I actually was a postdoc at MIT for 2 years. And you'll kind of see the connection here after I explain my next slide. And then in 2018, I moved to Texas A&M University, and that's where I still am. Okay, so as Carl mentioned, I was working on tritium D gamma. Mainly, it was a line shape study to look at basically properties for the unbound helium-5 nucleus, but when you're looking at the tritium D gamma to tritium DN branching ratio, you can actually motivate it from the inertial confinement fusion. So this would be studies like at the National Ignition Facility or the Laboratory for Laser Energetics at the University of Rochester. And so if you can have a better representation of the number of gammas that you have for one of their implosions, you know that those are going to be unscattered. You're not going to have a lot of weird bouncing around like you would with neutron diagnostics. So if you can say, oh, well, we had, this many gamma rays, we know there's this many gammas per neutrons, this is our neutron yield. That was kind of the idea. Some of their gamma diagnostics still maybe don't do exactly what they need to, but we were kind of helping in the puzzle here using our accelerator to do some of these basic science measurements. And actually, even this project itself is very interesting from a nuclear physics point of view. It's been studied for over 50 years, and it's basically a disagreement by a factor of 100 what this branching ratio value is. And so we were working to try to fit something into that overall puzzle. And so there's like a nice little cartoon here, just showing that some of the main capabilities to actually make this work would be the fact that we had the pulsed beam, the shielded time of flight tunnel, with the beam swinger. We had tritium targets here. Like, that's not normal. Most labs do not deal with tritium. And so it was definitely a unique thing that we had available here. We had all sorts of different detectors. And actually, our physics department machine shop, I literally took them like a piece of paper and said, I want something that looks kind of like this, and about this long, and do you have thin wall stainless? And they built this target chamber, like just from a piece of paper. It was magical. Okay, so tritium-DN reaction was a very important part of what I was doing here. So obviously, it was based on my thesis. And we also were able to use this neutron production and the gamma ray measurements for some other outside visitors from Los Alamos. And actually, I was kind of going back through a lot of photos, and I realized a theme of my work here was placing this BGO detector right inside the tunnel. And so if you take a look at the different dates there, it starts in May 2011. The most recent one I found was July 2017. So even after I graduated, I was still dragging the BGO into the tunnel. I also spent a lot of time working with the beam swinger. And then actually that weird picture right there, I put a little cartoon so you could see it's tritium. That's one of our nice shiny tritium targets that we've used for some of our measurements before we have the burn spot in it from the beam. Okay, so we did a lot of local projects here, but we also had many visiting groups. And so I actually spent a lot of time doing midnight shifts for outside users. And so I'll just kind of highlight here one of the main groups that we had. So if you ever go in the control room, you'll see all these chairs that say like SUNY Geneseo on the back of it. And this stems from the time that a combination of SUNY Geneseo and Houghton College, these are both in Western New York, brought like a dozen undergraduate students. They had like a trailer of equipment and 2 professors. And the idea here was they wanted to do a measurement of the carbon-12 N2N reaction. And obviously I mentioned the tritium target here. And so, it was a perfect place for producing the neutrons that they needed. And this is actually another one of those things that was motivated by the ICF community, because they were talking about looking at tertiary neutrons as something that could be used as a diagnostic, because this energy range would be above about 20 MeV, and so you could separate it from your DT neutron primaries of 14 MeV. So it was a pretty interesting background, but it was just crazy. Like, all these students came to visit, and normally on midnight shifts, I was just kind of sitting there by myself. There's this middle photo here. You had to like kind of watch the TV with the weather radar, just in case a big thunderstorm was coming, and you had to, put some of the pumps and things into bedtime mode. And we also had a camera, and it was focused on our tritium target on the end of the beam line. And there's this little thing we called the wobbler. And basically, it made it so that the end of the beam line went like this, so the beam would go around in a circle here and never actually burn the tritium target. And so you kind of had to watch this to make sure nothing broke. Lo and behold, one of the shifts, probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, the wobbler stopped. All of the alarms are going off and everything. And so it's like me and these couple like undergraduate students who had never worked in a lab before, but we went digging around, we found the O-ring, we fixed everything and got it working again. And so it's just always, it's nice to think about all of those students who came to visit here, And then actually I worked with some of them again in my job at MIT because I visited the lab in Rochester a lot. Some of them actually went to grad school there or ended up as technical staff. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so another thing I wanted, this was specifically requested, is talking about the broken tunnel door. And so you've heard everyone talk about these very large concrete doors that are used for the shielding. There's one that goes like to the small target room, the large target room, but then there's also one that goes to close off the beam tunnel itself. And so that's in there, so then you can just have a nice collimated opening and you're not going to get weird scattering from the main experimental area. And so I was here to get some follow-up data from my dissertation. We wanted to do some measurements with some different beam swinger angles. And so basically, we go to close the door and it decides to stop. You kind of push the button and it doesn't want to go. And so it got stuck at a 23-inch gap. And so if you look at, it would be the left photo, that's kind of like peering into the tunnel. And then I took another photo like looking out. And so it's one of those, okay, this is, what the backgrounds could possibly be, something kind of tries to bounce in or anything. We couldn't reschedule the beam. I had taken vacation days from MIT to come down to do this measurement. And so we made sure that we had the BGO nice in front of the tunnel face there, and we just turned the machine on and hoped for the best. And so actually, I do have a preliminary spectrum on the far right here. So this would be, let's see, how did I repin this? So it looks like counts per 200 keV, this would be the gamma rays from the tritium D gamma reaction. And if you take a look, it's an amazingly flat background. This collimated tunnel opening did its job. So everyone's always talking about, this is for neutron work. This has been great for reducing backgrounds on gamma ray measurements as well. So hopefully I will finally get this organized and published, and it's been a bit of a long time here. Okay, so I was talking about always putting the BGO into the tunnel. So another thing we did was actually bring the Texas Active Target Time Projection Chamber. And so this is, there's a nice little CAD picture of it in the upper corner. So basically you would have an incoming beam, and this whole vessel is filled with basically whatever your target gas would be, so you use it as both your gas and your detector. Normally we run CO2 or isobutane. And so there's a segmented region in the middle where you can basically get little tracks that you can reconstruct and see where your reaction vertex took place, and then use the energy loss in the gas to see what type of particles you had. There's also some auxiliary detectors in the back, especially for particles with maybe too high of energy going forward, and you want to do a nice particle identification. And so there's this idea that had been kicked around. I actually even remember a seminar visitor when I was a grad student who was talking about wanting to do neutron upscattering using a TPC. And so this was probably like 2012 or something when this guy was talking about. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's fine, whatever. But then, of course, so many years later, I'm the one that had to figure out how to make it work. And so actually, we knew we wanted to use the nice collimated tunnel just because, you get nice neutron beams and you could step through what energy you would like. But the problem was, would our detector fit inside the tunnel? And so we actually did kind of a scouting visit when the accelerator was down to replace the alpha source, and took, I think it was like a paper towel box or something, and cut it apart and measured it and taped it all back together, and we called it BoxAT. And we figured out a way to kind of shimmy it into the tunnel. And so we're glad it fit, and then kind of a middle picture here is actually real TechSat. It's pretty heavy, and we actually had to crane it down into the large target room so we could work on it. We actually built a little greenhouse tent that was our clean room so we could change our detectors, and it was a whole operation. I'm very grateful to the local staff here for dealing with all of that. And then the moment of truth, does TechSat fit into the tunnel? And yes, it did, which is great because that would become its home for many months last year. We actually started the run in March of 2020. And during that time, the entire state of Ohio shut down, and we were kindly asked to go home. And so we put TechSat into bedtime mode, and it took up a lot of space in the tunnel. And I guess thank you to students and anyone who delayed your projects, because TechSat was in the way. But luckily, we were able to come back and get some more data. And so this is just kind of a little bit of a science-y slide on what we were actually doing. So what's actually really cool is this would be the first neutron-induced reaction studied using an active target TPC. I know there's been some other work at LANL, I think it's fission in a TPC type deal, but this is the first actual active target TPC with neutrons. And so we were able to basically use our neutron beam to scan through and populate for the Hoyle state. And actually, I know everything always seems to come back to Hoyle state and carbon-12 and oxygen-16, or maybe it's Carl's influence, I don't know. And so just kind of a nice little cartoon of what we were doing was we used a deuterium beam on our deuteron gas cell. And again, I mentioned the nice collimated tunnel opening. And we actually were able to place a little CH2 foil inside our target, so then we could do NP scattering that has a known cross-section. So silicon detectors measure those protons. You can get basically what our neutron yield was. And then in our TPC, we can actually tune the pressure inside it so that we can basically have a reaction point somewhere centered in the chamber. And then we want to measure the 3 alphas that come out. And so there's probably a nicer cartoon in the upper right. So the experimental case is we were sending in a higher energy neutron, and you would get the 3 alpha particles and then some low energy neutron that you're not detecting out. But when it's actually a mirror here, so the time reversed is actually the astrophysical case. And so there's a paper that came out talking about, oh, well, what's the neutron influence in the triple alpha process? And so it's like, okay, well, let's see what we can do. And so it was so much help from technical staff, students, and everyone here. And we actually got a Scientific American article out of this. And for those of you co-authors on the paper, there's another draft ready. Please make sure you follow up and send some comments. Hoping to get that submitted soon. Okay, so in addition to the lab, I spent a lot of time in the School of Music here at Ohio University. It was kind of like my home away from home. And I played in the it used to be called Wind Ensemble and then became Wind Symphony. I played in the Symphony Orchestra some, as well as the other bands. And so we would actually get posters from a lot of the concerts. They would just be kind of up. And originally, I just had the posters on the door. This was 1 season's worth of concerts. But then the next school year started, and it was like, oh, well, now I'm out of space. And so I realized in my office, the walls, there was kind of this weird, I don't know if there had been a roof leak or something, but it was the walls were just terrible to look at. And so I just started kind of putting posters on the wall. And this was the result of all of that. Unfortunately, I had to take it all down because they painted the walls. And then after that, nothing would stick anymore. But I guess at least it wasn't yucky looking. And so actually one of my favorite performances every year was actually playing in the commencement ceremonies. It was so much work. I remember one year we actually played, it was a 35-minute processional. Could those people have walked any slower? And so this is just kind of a photo here. I think this is actually from commencement in 2018, just kind of pointing out where I was sitting, but it was always just, I just found it so interesting to be kind of right on the stage, right there, to be able to see what's going on. Actually, I think one year I sat pretty close to Joe Shields, and it was just always nice to kind of see everything and just all the, I don't know, just all the happy faces. And honestly, it's the largest audience you ever play for when you only play for the indoor concert bands. And so that was always just a nice part of my experience. And I'm actually really grateful to Carl and all the other professors and everyone who were okay with me disappearing for 2 or 3 hours, multiple times a week to go to rehearsals and to do other things. Because actually, one year I missed the NNSA symposium because I actually had to go to a band directors conference, and because there was like little solo bits and stuff, they couldn't find a sub for me, and Carl's like, okay, I'll present your poster if you make it. And there was no questions asked, like that's just what we were going to do. And so I'm very grateful I was still able to have that musical outlet in addition to doing my physics research. Okay, and then I kind of shamelessly went through and tried to dig out some group photos from over the years, so hopefully there are some familiar faces. Some of these are during experiments, some of these are during what I like to call the NNSA family reunion photos, and actually there's one from PhD Defense, ViewBody 21, so thank you to anyone that I definitely stole these photos from. Okay, so now we have to get to the nice takeaway slide. So I think one of the main things I learned is it's really okay to have a hobby outside of physics. Like, you don't just have to do physics every day, all day. Like, you need to find something else to, like, I don't want to say to make you feel like a whole person, but you need something creative or just something a little bit different. Another important thing would be, if you're not sure how to do something, don't be afraid to ask for help. Like, even if you've asked like 10 times how to do something, no one here is going to be upset. If anything, they're probably happy you're asking what to do, specifically with a piece of equipment, rather than you trying to just do something and breaking it. I did host a lot of visitors over the years. Actually, if you look back at some of the little photo shoots and stuff, it doesn't look like I was there, but really I was just sleeping after midnight shifts. Like, I helped so many people come through this lab. Some of them were really nice to work with, some of them maybe a little bit more difficult. And so it kind of gave me a perspective of the type of visiting scientist I wanted to be. And I think the most important thing is, a lot of people don't really get to plan, set up, build, like do their whole experiment and analyze it anymore. It seems like a lot of spaces, like, you kind of analyze the previous person's proposal, or maybe you build a detector, but you don't actually do anything. And so I'm very grateful that I was able to, do everything in nuclear physics. Like, it's been very helpful for, what I've been working on in my career. And with that, I would just like to thank everyone for their attention, and especially all of just the faculty, staff, grad students, just everyone over the years. Like, you can't really get through grad school without a group of friends and, people to get coffee with, but all the professors, even maybe the ones that you only had for like a first-year class, but they still, encouraged you and helped you along the way. And just some key personnel I have listed here for my thesis project, of course, includes Carl. Tom Massey, basically you can't do a neutron measurement without him. And then, of course, Don Carter, Devin Jacobs, and Doug Schaefer. And thank you, the department and everyone else, for supporting the lab all of these years. And so with that, thank you.
Sir. Yeah, thank you. It's actually quite fitting that I would talk after Cody. Cody was on her way out just as I was coming to Edwards, and she actually gave me my first tour of not only the lab, but also the entire university. So thank you very much, Cody. I also ended up taking over her desk, so she left me in good hands with 3 other students, Doug, Tyler, and Andrea, who were all very welcoming to me, as was everyone else at the lab, which I really appreciated. So a little bit about me. I'm from a town just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. I graduated from Clemson University in 2015, and while I was there, I had very fortunate experiences to do experiments at Texas A&M and also UC Davis. And that's where I really fell in love with nuclear physics and decided that I wanted to go to grad school. I've been a graduate student at OU, studying with Zach Meisel since 2016, and it's pretty interesting that I would end up at Ohio, because I was dead set against moving up north. I really don't like the cold. My sister had been pressuring me to move up here to be closer with her and the kids, and it was a hard no for me until she also did just a basic Google search for I guess, particle accelerator near me, and she found Ohio University, and I was sold. So a little bit about my work. I have been studying alpha N cross-sections, which are relevant to astrophysics through element formation, origin of the element studies, and also in nuclear applications and things like medical imaging. And my main project while I've been a graduate student was to refurbish this old detector called Figaro. It had been abandoned or left behind or gifted to the lab a few years ago, and my advisor and Dr. Massey had the idea that perhaps we could refurbish this detector and use it to create a new one that we would install, and I designed and developed for the lab that we would use to measure these alpha N cross-sections. So on average, a physics PhD takes about 6 years to complete. I know that a lot of you in the audience have your own unique experience getting your PhD, and today I'd like to tell you all about mine. I hope that it will be relatable, but I'm kind of more interested in hearing from the previous students and learning how the Edwards student experience has changed over the years. So in year one, we actually don't start with research. We are told to focus on our classes and to teach labs. So you can see, this is a picture from 2016 of my cohort taking quantum mechanics with Dr. Prakash and also math methods with Dr. Bruni. And I will admit that we did not always dress this nice. We were forewarned that someone with a camera would be there that day. In year two, we get to pick our specialty. So for those of us that choose nuclear physics, experimental nuclear physics specifically, we spend the summer learning how to operate the accelerator. So we learn how to run the accelerator, we learn how to tune beam, and also we take turns on shift. And I will say that it takes many, many months before you're finally approved to run the accelerator by yourself. But I can tell you from firsthand experience that nothing can quite prepare you for the day that you see these lights and you hear this sound. But we are well trained. We know exactly what to do. We have a manual. We identify which lights are going off. We call the appropriate engineer. And so I was quite ready for all that, but what I didn't expect on this particular night was that I would be asked to go into the experimental area, which I didn't have a whole lot of experience with at the time. So I did what I always do when I think I'm in trouble, is I send a video SOS to some senior grad students, so specifically Cody, Tyler, Andrea. Thank you guys very much for always answering my 3 a.m. calls. And if we ever do run into any real problems, we know exactly who to call, and that's the man, Don Carter. So thank you very much, Don. Year 3 was when I really got into the heart of my research. So as I said before, my job was to refurbish this old detector, and the first part of that was just to see if the thing worked. So I worked with Dr. Massey a lot over that year to get the detector up and running. Basically what we wanted to find out was, okay, does the detector work? And can we simulate the detector response in the simulation software called MCMP? So we devised an experiment to test this. We put a radioactive californium-252 source just in front of the detector. Neutrons are emitted, and the detector counts the neutrons. And then I developed a simulation to model that. And what we found was that my experiment, my simulation, did not agree. And what was interesting is that the closer we put the source to the detector, the better agreement we found. But as we moved the source further away, we found more disagreement. And so the idea was that maybe it has to do with that distance, and maybe it has to do something with the concrete, because neutrons can scatter in the concrete. And so this was an idea that we had, and in order to test that, I listed my good friends Don and Andrea to help me hunt down all of the specifications of the concrete. And this turned into quite the ordeal. Don brought out old lab specs so that we could figure out the thickness of the concrete. And also we learned that there was a granite slab underneath. Both of those I was able to put into my simulation. And as far as what the concrete was made out of, for that, the first attempt we did was just to sort of flake off pieces of the concrete. That didn't work very well, as you can maybe imagine. But what ended up working out quite well was someone pointed out that at some point over the lab's history, a piece of the concrete had been drilled out, and it had been stored somewhere. So Don went on a scavenger hunt for me and found this. And I was able to weigh it, get its measurements. I was able to put the density of the concrete and the thickness into my simulations. And wouldn't you know it, my simulations and my experiment were now in agreement. So that told us that the detector was working and that I could continue on with my work. Year 4, we had some fun times in the lab, and we also did some travels. It turns out that the lab was shut down for some time in this year. So I had the fortunate experience to actually see inside of the accelerator. You can only do that when the lab's shut down. And before anyone freaks out, this video was taken when the entire lab was totally shut down, the power was off. This big red button, there are several around the lab, and those are for immediate shutdown. So these are for just the most emergency situation. If someone was trapped in a room with radiation with the accelerator on, you would hit that button. And I'll admit, I always kind of wanted to hit it, and Devin said I could, so I did. We did a lot of travels throughout my time. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner, those are several grad students on the way, probably to Michigan State or Notre Dame. That's where we do a lot of our outside experiments, or maybe to a conference. You can see Shiv here in the middle, just doing the typical everyday work in the lab. Gula is sitting at her desk, most likely doing some analysis. That's another thing that graduate students do a lot. In the top right-hand corner, the students got very fortunate experience to meet Nobel laureate Ray Weiss, who came to the lab and we were able to talk and to meet with. A couple of years ago, we also got to go to Washington, D.C. to talk with Congress, men and women, about funding in science. And we got super lucky that the university's private jet was available. So myself and a few other students and a few other faculty members got to ride in the private jet. And that's an experience I will never forget. Around year 5, I started to notice that I was saying a lot of goodbyes, which of course are bittersweet as your friends graduate and move on. You can see Tyler, Abanash, Irene, and also Sam was one of the more recent graduates. And that's kind of a sign that, once all of your friends are graduating, probably you will be too. So that's what I've been doing in the last year. It's been to wrapping up my project. The detector that I was talking about has now been built. It's operational, and we've used it to perform the first cross-section measurements with it. And you can see some of my data there, which I'd be happy to talk in more detail about it at the poster session. And I just want to say thank you to all of my collaborators that made that possible, specifically my advisor, Dr. Meisel. So the last thing I'd like to leave you with is one of the key lessons that I learned from my time at Edwards, and that's that what we do really matters. This was pointed out to me a few years ago when we had the fortunate experience to meet with the Margaret Boyd Scholars. This is a group of 20 or so undergraduate women who were given a scholarship to go to OU for the 4 years. And we were asked to meet with them and discuss our time as women scientists, and also to give them a tour of the lab. And we give tours of the lab all the time, honestly. So I didn't think a whole lot of it until a couple of weeks later. I was approached by one of the students who asked if she could come back to the lab and take photos because she wanted to do a write-up of the lab in the OU magazine. And so that was pretty special and really nice to see the lab highlighted in such a way. Another student, Randy Bateman, she used her experience touring the lab in her report for her final project. And I'd like to read what she wrote because it's really stuck with me. She said, "When I first arrived at the lab, I was in awe. I had never been in a laboratory before. When I was younger, I was obsessed with labs and experiments. Being able to see a real one fulfilled my childhood dream. After visiting the lab, I felt grateful and empowered." And it's not very often that we get a chance to stand in front of people who have made all of our work possible. So to all of you that have worked at Edwards over the last 50 years, on behalf of all the students, I would like to say thank you. You've really made us feel grateful and also empowered. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Kristen. So now we will have a break until noon. So there is, I think there is coffee back there. Is there? Yes, there is. Okay, very good. I'm getting the thumbs up from Robert. And we will see you all back here at noon. There will be posters in the corridor. Go talk to the people presenting the posters, talk to each other, have a good time. All right, we'll see you back here in an hour.